Right now, across the vast expanse of British Columbia, screens are glowing in the darkened living rooms of the interior. Families in the lower mainland, up through the Coquihalla Highway, and deep into the mountain towns of Revelstoke and Golden are refreshing the BC Hydro outage map. We watch the red dots multiply across the grid. We see the weather warnings scroll across the bottom of the news feeds. Winter storm warning, hazardous conditions, stay off the roads. We sit in our insulated homes, frustrated by the flickering lights, worried about the Wi-Fi signal of the morning commute. We look out the window at the falling snow and we see an inconvenience, a delay, a nuisance. But we forget. We forget that in this country, winter is not just a season, it is a sentient force. We forget that the ground we stand on, the steel rails that connect our economy, and the mountain passes we drive through were bought at a terrible price. They were paid for in blood. Imagine the storm you see outside your window right now. Now strip away the GPS satellites watching from above. Strip away the avalanche beacons and the satellite phones. Strip away the search and rescue helicopters waiting on the tarmac. Take away the central heating and the Gore-Tex jackets. Leave only the absolute darkness, the biting cold of the Selkirk Mountains at midnight, and the terrifying subsonic rumble of millions of tons of snow waiting to break loose. Tonight, while the wind howls against your glass, we are going back to a night where the snow took much more than just the electricity. We are opening the file on the single deadliest day in Canadian mountaineering history, a day when nature reminded the British Empire that it could not be tamed. March 4th, 1910, Rogers Pass. This is the Kanata Files. To understand why 62 men died on that mountainside, we cannot just look at the avalanche. We have to understand the obsession that put them there. We have to look at the sheer, unyielding arrogance of the Victorian era. In the late 19th century, the Canadian Pacific Railway, the CPR, was not just a corporation, it was the spine of the Dominion. It was the national dream manifested in steel and steam. The government in Ottawa knew one terrifying truth. Without a physical link binding the Pacific coast to the rest of Canada, British Columbia would eventually drift south. It would be absorbed by the United States. The railway was the only thing stitching this massive, impossible country together. But standing in the way of that dream was a geological fortress, the Selkirk Mountains. Many people confuse the Selkirks with the Rockies. They assume they are one and the same. They are not. The Rockies, for all their grandeur, are sedimentary. They are rugged, yes, but they have passes that are manageable. The Selkirks are older, they are harder, and they are infinitely more dangerous. Geographically, the Selkirks sit perfectly positioned to catch the wet, heavy weather systems rolling in from the Pacific Ocean. When that moisture hits the cold interior air and slams into the granite wall of the mountains, it drops. It drops snow in quantities that are hard to comprehend if you haven't lived there. 12 meters, nearly 40 feet of snow a year is not an anomaly here, it is an average. For the railway surveyors in the 1880s, the Selkirks were a nightmare. There seemed to be no way through, until a stubborn, foul-mouthed surveyor named Major A.B. Rogers found a narrow V-shaped notch between the peaks. He called it Rogers Pass. It was the key to the Pacific. It was the Northwest Passage of the railway age. It allowed the CPR to shorten the route by hundreds of kilometers, avoiding the massive Big Bend of the Columbia River. Major Rogers was given a $5,000 check and had his name immortalized on the map. But in finding that pass, he had unwittingly led the railway into a trap. The engineers knew it almost immediately. The pass was too steep, too narrow, and too snowy. From the moment the first spike was driven, the CPR found itself in a war of attrition with the snow. The company fought back with the brute force of industrial engineering. They constructed massive timber snow sheds, literal tunnels made of 12 by 12-inch cedar beams covering kilometers of the track. These sheds were designed to let the avalanches slide harmlessly over the roofs of the trains. By 1910, the line through Rogers Pass was considered a triumph of man over nature. The CPR had built a station, they had built a roundhouse, they had small communities living in the shadow and the peaks. They ran the Imperial Limited, the flagship passenger train, through the pass daily. Men in silk hats and women in fine dresses sipped tea in dining cars, gazing out at the terrifying white slopes, confident in the safety of modern engineering. But the mountains of British Columbia do not like to be tamed. They operate on a timeline that doesn't care about train schedules or stock prices, and they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Fast forward to the winter of 1909 and 1910. If you speak to historians in Revelstoke or Golden, they will tell you that the winter of 1910 has its own mythology. Even by the brutal standards of the Canadian High Country, this season was an anomaly. It was a winter of the century. The snow didn't just fall, it besieged the mountains. It started early and it never stopped. By January, the snowbanks at the trackside were towering over the roofs of the locomotives. By February, the avalanches were becoming frequent, aggressive, and unpredictable. They weren't just running down the usual gullies, they were carving new paths through the ancient forests. The CPR was running entirely on the sweat and blood of its workforce. Bucking snow was the term they used. It was a constant, exhausting battle to keep the iron road open. The schedule was God. If the train stopped, the coal stopped, the mail stopped, the food stopped, the heart of Canada would skip a beat. And so, the railway deployed its ultimate weapon, the rotary snowplow. We need to pause here to appreciate the terrifying majesty of these machines. A rotary snowplow, specifically engine number 2, which was stationed at Revelstoke, was not a simple plow, it was a monster. Picture a standard steam locomotive, but remove the front cowcatcher. In its place, mount a massive, house-sized steel wheel housing a set of spinning blades. Inside the housing, a dedicated steam engine drove the wheel at hundreds of revolutions per minute. When a rotary hit a snowbank, it didn't push it aside, it consumed it. It chewed through trees, rocks, ice, and hard-packed snow, vomiting a plume of white debris 100 feet into the air. It was loud, it was violent, and it was the only thing that could keep Rogers Pass open. But a machine is useless without men to serve it. On the night of March 4th, 1910, the call went out. A slide had come down from Cheops Mountain, burying the tracks. 63 men were mustered. We need to talk about who these men were. In the official reports of the time, they were often just listed as numbers or payroll entries, but they were the human infrastructure of this nation. At the top of the hierarchy was Roadmaster John Anderson. He was a veteran of the high country, a man who claimed he could smell a slide before it happened. He was respected, tough, and experienced. He was the man responsible for the safety of the line. Then there was the engine crew, the engineers, the firemen, the conductors. These were skilled tradesmen, the elite of the working class. But the vast majority of the 63 were navvies, laborers. And this is where the story becomes a tragedy of the Canadian immigrant experience. Many of these men were Japanese workers who had crossed an ocean to build a life in a country that often didn't want them but needed their labor. Others were Scandinavians, Swedes, and Norwegians who were hired because the foreman believed they knew the snow. There were men from the UK,
from Eastern Europe. They were living in bunk cars, saving their wages to send home or to buy a small patch of land. They were the invisible hands that kept the empire moving. And so the railway deployed its ultimate weapon. They called them out of their warm bunks in the middle of a blizzard. They pulled on their heavy wool coats, their hobnailed boots, and they grabbed their shovels. They boarded the work train and headed into the dark, climbing the steep grade towards the summit of Rogers Pass. They arrived at track 17. The rotary plow roared into life, its headlight cutting a yellow cone through the swirling white chaos. The men jumped down into the trench, a corridor of snow higher than their heads. They were working to clear the slide from Cheops Mountain. But they weren't looking at Cheops. They were standing with their backs to the other side of the valley. Directly opposite them, rising steeply into the darkness, was the shoulder of Avalanche Mountain. The slide they were clearing was the bait. It had drawn them into the kill zone. And now the trap was set.
The timeline of a disaster is often measured in hours, then minutes, then split seconds. It is 11:30 p.m., March 4th. The work is almost done. The track is nearly clear. The men are exhausted, but the mood is lightening. You can imagine the sensory details of that moment. The deafening roar of the rotary plow has died down to a simmer as the engineer idles the boiler. The air smells of coal smoke, ozone, and wet wool. The wind is howling through the pass, but down in the trench, sheltered by the snow walls, it is strangely calm. Roadmaster Anderson is satisfied. They have beaten the winter for another night. The Imperial Limited passenger train is waiting down the line in Revelstoke. Soon they will signal the all clear, and the passengers will glide through here, asleep in their berths, never knowing how close the line came to closing. Some of the men have stuck their shovels in the snow. They are rolling cigarettes, their breath steaming in the cold air. Others have climbed up onto the running boards of the locomotive to warm their hands near the firebox. They are joking, talking about the end of the shift, perhaps thinking about a hot meal. They are standing on a narrow ledge of civilization, carved into a wilderness that is hostile to human life. High above them, 2,000 feet up on the dark slopes of Avalanche Mountain, the physics of the snowpack reaches a breaking point. The conditions that day had been a perfect recipe for disaster. Warm sun during the day had melted the surface snow, and the freezing night had turned it into a heavy, icy slab sitting on top of a weak, sugary layer of depth hoar. It was a loaded gun, just waiting for a trigger. We don't know what the trigger was, a falling rock, a shift in the wind, or maybe just the vibrations of the rotary plow echoing off the canyon walls. Whatever it was, at exactly 11:30 p.m., gravity won. Survivors of avalanches often talk about the sound. They say it starts with a crack, like a rifle shot or a whip crack. That is the sound of the fracture line propagating across the face of the mountain. But at Rogers Pass, the sound that followed wasn't a slide, it was a roar. Millions of tons of snow, timber, rock, and ice detached from the summit. It didn't just slide down the slope, it poured into the valley like a waterfall. It accelerated to speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour in seconds. And then came the wind. This is the part of an avalanche that people don't understand until they see it. When that much mass moves that fast, it pushes a column of air ahead of it, a shockwave. Before the snow even touched the men, the shockwave hit them. It hit with the force of a hurricane. It snapped century-old spruce trees like matchsticks. It blew the caps off the men's heads and sucked the air out of their lungs. And then the mountain fell on them. The rotary plow, engine number 2, weighing 91 tons, was not just derailed, it was lifted. The physics are terrifying to contemplate. A 91-ton steel locomotive was tossed into the air like a child's toy. It was thrown 15 meters away from the tracks, landing upside down, its wheels spinning in the void. The heavy wooden boxcars behind it, where some men were resting, were smashed into splinters. They were reduced to kindling in the blink of an eye. And the 63 men, they didn't have a chance to run. They didn't have a chance to scream. They barely had time to look up. The avalanche buried them under 10 meters of concrete hard snow. The headlight was extinguished, the steam engine hissed and died, and instantly the mechanical roar of the industrial age was replaced by a suffocating absolute silence. The valley was filled with the debris of a forest and the wreckage of the pride of the CPR. 62 heartbeats stopped in seconds.
In the midst of total devastation, there was one mathematical impossibility. There was 63, Billy Lachance. Billy was the locomotive fireman. He had been standing on the running board of the engine right next to the boiler when the world ended. The force of the air blast picked him up and threw him violently backward, but he didn't hit the rocks. He didn't get crushed by the rolling engine. By a stroke of sheer, blind, astronomical luck, Billy landed on top of a massive boulder just as the snow piled up around him. The avalanche buried him deep, but the position of the boulder and a large shattered hemlock tree created a tiny triangular air pocket, a coffin of ice, but one with oxygen. He lay there in the dark, stunned, bruised, his ears ringing. He was disoriented, unsure if he was alive or dead. He listened. He expected to hear the moans of his friends. He expected to hear shouting, orders, the hiss of steam. But he heard nothing, just the settling of the snow, the creak of the ice hardening, and the wind howling high above in the pass. The loneliness of that moment is impossible to describe. He was buried in a tomb with 62 colleagues, and he was the only one breathing. Billy Lachance began to dig. Driven by pure animal panic and adrenaline, he clawed his way upward. He dug until his fingers were raw and bleeding. He dug through the packed snow, fighting the suffocation, and then his hand broke the surface. He felt the cold wind. He saw a star. He pulled himself out of the hole and stood on the surface of the slide. He looked around for the train. He looked for the lantern lights. There was nothing. The landscape had been erased. The valley floor was now 30 feet higher than it had been minutes ago. The train was gone. The track was gone. He stumbled through the dark towards the watchman's shack, the only structure left standing. He was the sole survivor of the White Death. News of the disaster didn't reach Revelstoke immediately. The telegraph lines had been snapped like thread. It wasn't until the silence on the line became too long, until the dispatcher realized the all clear never came, that the alarm was raised. When the relief train finally arrived from Revelstoke the next morning, the rescue crew was greeted by a sight that haunted them for the rest of their lives. It was a graveyard of white, scarred by the brown earth of the uprooted forest. The overturned locomotive lay like a dead beast, its wheels pointing to the sky. The recovery effort was grueling. It wasn't a rescue, it was an excavation. Hundreds of men volunteered. They dug in shifts, terrified that another slide would come down and bury them too. As they dug down, they found the men. And this is the detail that chills the blood of anyone who reads the archives. It is the detail that speaks to the suddenness of the event. Because the avalanche had hit so instantly and with such crushing hydrostatic pressure, many of the men hadn't even fallen over. The rescuers found them standing upright, frozen in place, shovels still in their hands, poised to throw a load of snow, cigarettes still near their lips.
They had been preserved in the exact moment of their death, a macabre terracotta army of the railways. The bodies were brought down to Revelstoke by train. The town, accustomed to death on the rails, had never seen anything like this. They ran out of space. The undertaking parlors were full. They turned the local curling rink into a temporary morgue. Rows of bodies covered in blankets lay on the ice where children usually played. 58 of the dead were never identified by their families back home. The Japanese workers, the nameless navvies, they were buried in a mass grave in the Revelstoke Cemetery. If you go there today, you can still see the marker. It is a somber reminder of the cost of the ticket.
The Rogers Pass disaster of 1910 did more than just kill 62 men. It broke the spirit of the CPR engineers. For 30 years, they had believed they could engineer their way out of anything. They believed that steel and timber were stronger than snow. The Avalanche proved them wrong. They finally admitted that they could not defeat the Selkirk Mountains with snowsheds and plows alone. The cost in blood and treasure was simply too high. They decided to retreat, or rather, they decided to go under. 3 years later, the CPR began blasting the Connaught Tunnel, an 8-kilometer hole straight through the heart of Mount Macdonald. When it opened in 1916, it allowed the trains to bypass the deadliest section of Rogers Pass forever. The tunnel was a marvel of engineering, but it was also a monument to defeat. It was an admission that, in the Canadian wilderness, nature always holds the winning hand. Today, Rogers Pass is still vital. The Trans-Canada Highway runs through it, but the way we handle the snow has changed. We don't send men out with shovels to fight the mountain anymore. We declare war on it. If you drive through Rogers Pass in the winter today, you might hear the booming of artillery. The Canadian Armed Forces, in partnership with Parks Canada, operate the world's largest mobile avalanche control program. They use 105mm howitzer cannons to shoot the mountains. They trigger the avalanches on their terms before they get big enough to bury a highway. It is a sophisticated, high-tech operation, but the fear is still there. Every howitzer shell fired is a nod of respect to the men of 1910. It is an acknowledgement that the White Death is still up there, waiting. So tonight, as you look at that weather warning on your phone, as you watch the snow pile up on your driveway in BC or Ontario, remember the lesson of 1910. We build our cities, our highways, and our power grids. We surround ourselves with technology and convince ourselves that we have tamed this land. We think we are safe in our warm houses because we have an outage map app. But the snow that looks so beautiful on a postcard is heavy. It is indifferent to our schedules, and it is powerful. When the hydro goes out and the wind shakes the walls, take a moment. Think of the 62 men standing in the dark at Rogers Pass. Think of the silence that followed the roar, and remember that we are only guests in this terrain. This has been a file from the archives of the True North. I'm your host. This is the Kanata Files. Stay safe out there and keep watching the snow.